بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سيد الرئيس السادة.
On behalf of Allah the Most Merciful, Mr. President, distinguished delegates, on behalf of the delegation of Qatar and in my own behalf, I have the privilege of extending to you, Mr. President, your congratulations on having been elected president of this conference. It is likewise our duty at this propitious opportunity to express our gratitude to the government of Canada, our gracious host, and express our appreciation for the facilities and steps taken to ensure the success of this conference. To Mr. Peñalosa and his cooperators, we express our esteem for all the efforts they have untiringly made to ensure the success of the conference. This conference, ladies and gentlemen, is of the utmost importance. It is universal in character and extends to all human settlements throughout the world. It is therefore a very complex task we face because human settlements cover a whole range of problems such as land, population, the environment, various services, and the human and material needs of peoples. But these complex tasks represent the very objectives of the United Nations in regard to joint international action to improve the quality of life and create peace and security throughout the world. Recent years have been witness to specific action taken by the United Nations to solve fundamental problems throughout the world, in particular in the developing countries, which are afflicted by ignorance, disease, and underdevelopment. These countries need material and technical assistance so as to be able to exploit their own resources and raise their productivity. United Nations efforts deserve our appreciation because they're intended to improve the lot of man and diminish the gap that divides nations so that we will all have similar conditions and an identical humanity throughout the world. Mr. President, temporary solutions only aggravate problems and engender others. And this is why we should abandon this palliative, which is a barrier to the progress of mankind. And this becomes even clearer when we speak of our experience in this field. Indeed, our country, during the last quarter of a century, has been witness to an urban economic and social progress at high speed. We need technical experts to meet our needs, and this has contributed to an increase in the population. Very varied problems have arisen in regard to transporting the population and the distribution of the population. For the solution of these problems, it was necessary for us to have a general approach and establish priorities. In regard to housing, for example, a part of the population lived in agglomerations which were removed from centers and scattered, and it was difficult to provide services for them. There's also the problem of the overpopulation of the capital, where we have foreign manpower, and our problems have been aggravated by migration from the country. We have had to adopt a general plan for economic and social development to solve these problems. As regards the problem of scattered populations, we have ensured services for these populations, and we have also created new towns to receive populations from small agglomerations. We have desalinated water, created artesian wells so as to bring about acceptable conditions conditions in the human settlements. We have established new industries and used waste and recycled waste in order to provide fertilizer and increase the area of arable land. We have endeavored to imprint a modern seal on our cities, and we have provided services such as mosques, schools, hospitals, and other public services so that they will not have simple dwellings, but rather create units which can be integrated with other sectors. Furthermore, these projects are socially and culturally important and contribute to make our citizens more attached to their country and aware of their own responsibilities in regard to production and development. In order to lessen the problem of overpopulation, we have planned new districts in our capital and also destroyed old houses and broadened the streets. We have built new quarters which we have made available to low-income groups. And we have created an industrial zone outside the capital, and there we have grouped industrial plants. This project went hand in hand with other projects to build sufficiently broad streets and supply electricity, water, and telephone services to the residential districts. We have also set up varied industries and created important new industries such as the petrochemical, cement, steel and iron industries. In the city of Messerid, we have built an industrial quarter, and there we have built accommodation for workers. In this way, our human settlements policy is intended to meet the development needs in various sectors. Since this development plan is intended to achieve maximum exploitation of our resources, and since we have expanded human settlements and productive activities, and we have also trained the technical experts so that they could take over, and we have cooperated with the International Labour Organization so as to establish a vocational training center. With the World Health Organization, we have set up a center to train nurses, and we have a network of national universities, and we have also given fellowships to our graduates so as to specialize in education services which are still not developed in our country. Mr. President, the natural resources we have enabled us to implement several projects. Nevertheless, we need the technical experience and modern technology. And because of our cooperation with developed countries and international organizations, we try to obtain their assistance in this field. Other developing countries, of course, have not the means available to us in order to implement their national projects and cannot obtain the necessary technical services. And this is why these countries sometimes have recourse to palliatives or partial solutions without being able to adopt integrated solutions for the various development sectors. Mr. President, emphasis should be placed on the fact that the human settlements are closely linked to development because, in fact, overpopulation in the cities leads to insufficient hygienic conditions, social implications which create unrest, and the rural exodus all create problems which cannot be solved without developing the country and developing industry and creating rural industries. That is why we need a global development plan that enables us to use our natural resources by trained, qualified staff. Internationally, development plans should be adopted for each sector. Implementation will require the nature of economic relations as they now exist among countries. Investments, trade, and the transfer of technology can serve development programs and ensure the progress of mankind, so as to continue, rather than continuing with the present methods. This is why people's needs must be determined, and then we must nationally and internationally find adequate solutions. And this is why this conference should constitute a new point of departure toward a humane world society which cooperates closely as opposed to exploitation of man by man. Allow me, Mr. President, to say that we express our sympathy to countries that are still subject to oppression and cannot exercise their most elementary rights, such as freedom and independence. It is inconceivable that the people of Palestine living in occupied Palestine and outside their country should continue to suffer oppression, injustice, and exile. This is why our conference, which should seek the best solutions to improve the conditions of living of peoples, should pay particular attention to this problem and put an end to the tragedy which afflicts them so that they may build their own lives like other people do on sound foundations. We are convinced that this conference will arrive at concrete solutions for the benefit of the peoples of the world, and that this conference will enable future generations to benefit from a better life, a life of dignity in peace, justice, and human brotherhood. Capsule, please.
هذه صورة من العناية
Here you see how Qatar is dealing with improving the conditions of man. Resources have been allocated to building model human settlements, and entire cities have been built. Cities which are provided with all services. Cities have water and electricity and telephone services.
وفيما تقوم
Old dwellings are destroyed and new districts are built. Low-income groups leave their archaic dwellings and move into modern housing, which ensures them a happy and prosperous life.
إن وزارة العمل والشؤون
The Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs at Qatar is planning long-range project. These are intended to make the nomad sedentary, build housing for workers whenever they move into houses which would guarantee them with physical comfort feel happier.
وهكذا تحقق الإرادة العازمة في قطر بمجهودات.
By these means, under the aegis of our emir and under the direction of our government, is building modern homes and achieving social progress.
I thank the distinguished Minister of Labor and Social Affairs of Qatar. I now give the floor to the Director General of Urban Planning and Public Building, Ministry of Public Works and Community Facilities of Rwanda, His Excellency Mr. Barrier Aloy.
Monsieur le Vice-Président, Monsieur
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the Rwanda delegation is very pleased to be able to represent His Excellency Major General Habyarimana Juvenal, President of the Republic of Rwanda and Founder President of the National Revolutionary Movement for Development, and through him, the people of Rwanda. At this conference, which is the result of such long preparation, and whose major objective is the improvement of the quality of life of the vast majority of a population which, as was noted by the community of nations, continues to live in unacceptable conditions marked by considerable inequalities with regard to standard of living and amenities within the country and as between one country and another. On behalf of the delegation of Rwanda, which I have the privilege of heading, I'd like to take this opportunity to associate myself with all distinguished previous speakers in paying tribute to the Secretary General of the United Nations and his closest colleagues who have taken the initiative for this happy international gathering on human settlements, a meeting made possible to the very active cooperation of the Canadian government, whose guests we are. We'd like to express our warm gratitude. Mr. Vice President, the clearly unequal distribution of resources and inequalities of opportunity, demographic growth, the unprecedented scope of the rural exodus, the loss of indispensable resources entailed by exorbitant armaments expenditures, are all factors which show clearly that the social and natural environment indispensable to all life is in the course of deterioration. Furthermore, the cumulative effect of all these negative trends is particularly apparent in the condition of human settlements, which are, after all, the places where men live, work, and enjoy recreation. Human settlements constitute, therefore, the center of all economic development and social progress. This being so, it is man who plays the principal role in development and should, hence, be the major beneficiary of it. However, if we want to give man his proper place, we must first of all eliminate all constraints which diminish him and prevent him from improving his lot. The Habitat Conference should constitute the response of the governments of the world to the crisis affecting the life of man, a crisis which should be viewed within a world context as an integral part of the world struggle for development. The solution to the world problem of human settlements, with all its economic and social, cultural, and even ecological differences, cannot and should not be anything but the sum of all the efforts of all the peoples of the world. Indeed, all countries pursue the same objectives, which do vary in detail from one country to another. The rapid growth of major cities and the rural exodus are absorbing available resources particularly and are promoting the establishment and extension of vast areas of slums and squatter colonies, and in the final analysis create more problems than they solve. Rural migrants who come and settle in towns, generally speaking, only find very ill-paid employment or no employment at all, and little or no housing they can afford. The low-income urban population continues to increase, not only because of internal migration, but also because of the natural increase of the population and the lack of suitable work. The complexity of the problem of housing and human settlements is such that large-scale action should be contemplated in two aspects. If all the countries of the world are going to improve the quality of life of thousands of men. We hope that this Conference of the United Nations on Human Settlements will be an excellent opportunity to determine the priority to be accorded to housing and human settlements by the final decisions of this Vancouver Conference. Several real problems raised in the field of housing and human settlements are curbing the full flowering of man and are making even more difficult his living conditions. The Rwanda delegation would like to congratulate and thank the Secretary General of the Community of Nations and the Government of Canada for the choice of Vancouver as the site for the meeting and for having organized this international conference. A conference at which we hope more concrete solutions should be found to improve the quality of life of the peoples of the world while respecting the principles of national sovereignty and strengthening cultural integrity. Mr. Vice President, in the light of the need for brevity, because of the time limit, I shall not make an exhaustive statement of the policy, the housing policy and human settlements policy in Rwanda, but it does seem to us necessary to try to give a global but nonetheless summary account of the real problem we face in our country by bringing out clearly the achievements in this field and our plans for the future, as well as past failures. Indeed, Rwanda is an old country, but a young independent nation, where rural housing, very highly dispersed, is a typical habitation for 97% of the population. This type of settlement accounts for 65% of the gross domestic product. But what is peculiar to Rwanda is the fact that the general characteristics of rural habitation apply to a territory of 26,338 square kilometers, which has to support this year a population of about 4,263,000 people. That is about 162 inhabitants per square kilometer. On the basis of these figures, and the light of a natural growth rate of 2.6% per year, Rwanda has experienced a net population increase of 110,000, 105,000 of which are in the countryside. If we want to arrest the momentum of the potentially tragic population explosion, the only solution is that which would harmonize all partial solutions. Urbanization on the basis of 10 or a dozen towns is something which affects only about 150,000 people, hardly equal to 1 year's natural population growth. In other words, if urbanization is to be the only safety valve for demographic growth, every year we would have to found two new towns of the size of Kigali. In these circumstances, the relatively rapid rate of increase in the capacity to accommodate newcomers seems insufficient. Further efforts at urbanization, with all that entails in terms of creating jobs, structures, and infrastructure, should be made, without, however, it being possible to assign to that process the objective of the decongestion of the countryside. The development of new land is a solution which is less and less rational. The remarkable work of organizing the peasants, which has been undertaken for 15 years now, has made it possible to establish in relatively satisfactory conditions about 250,000 people, or again, just the equivalent of 2 years of natural population growth at the present rate. But the organization of peasant collectives has made it possible for some of the people to benefit from certain elements of progress, and it is logically advantageous to continue extending this, thus opening the way to the future for the next generation. However, extending peasant collectives requires available arable land or very far-reaching land reforms in order to recover this land. At the present time, Rwanda is suffering from a lack of arable land, and in practice it's difficult to imagine any massive extension of peasant collectives. Furthermore, land reform, even if it yields positive results, requires serious and long preparation. No results can be hoped for in the immediate future. An attempt at morphological typology is being made on the basis of a study of aerial reconnaissance of the country for a regrouping of the population. Ways of grouping the population have a twofold role in terms of accommodating new residents and strengthening secondary functions and tertiary functions, the development of which the development of the Rwanda countryside is most urgently in need. This new kind of human establishment seems to be the only instrument capable of ensuring the intensification of agricultural production by the specialization of exchange and the improvement of the peasant conditions. We are quite aware that the ground to cover is very long, and that if we want to reach this goal, we need tremendous resources, which we do not have at present. This action should not be limited solely to the rural population. Considerable effort should also be made for the benefit of the urban population, which to this very day continues to be badly housed. The renting of suitable housing apartments in existing quarters of towns, a multiplying effect of the possibilities of improving the standard of living. Modern quarters, in fact, are the only to benefit from progress. Finally, the fragmentation of the country, the rural exodus, the rapid increase in the rate of population growth, the lack of land, suitable housing, infrastructure, public facilities, a whole incredibly long list of crucial problems facing Rwanda if we want to improve the quality of life of our population. Even if we overlook the fact that Rwanda is classified as among the 25 poorest countries of the world. In order to resolve all these problems, Rwanda is counting a great deal on international financings. For this reason, we very strongly support the initiative taken in the second session of the Governing Council of the United Nations Environment Programme to create an international support fund for human settlements, and we hope that this fund will be a very effective complement to national efforts in the quest for solutions to the financial problems relating to housing and human settlements. In order for national efforts to be able to arouse international public opinion, donor organizations and countries should give the very high priority to human settlements, which is their due, and we should create a new institution with the task of planning and carrying out a genuine and well-thought-out policy of human settlements. In conclusion, all countries in the world have been made more sensitive to the problems of housing, and distinguished experts have come from all corners of the world to come and exchange here in Vancouver their knowledge and experience. We very much hope that this process of making people more sensitive and this pooling of experience on this vast common problem will be an excellent opportunity to fight the constraints of selfishness and to make it clear once again that the high priority which should be given to the flowering and well-being of the whole of mankind. Thank you, sir. Capsule, please.
La cellule d'habitation traditionnelle.
The traditional cell of habitation, a kurugo, it's a thatched cottage. We also have barns constructed in a similar way. This is the trend to improve housing methods is promoting the use of bricks and more modern types of construction in our country, Rwanda, a rural country with the highest density of land tenure in the world, 4 million inhabitants on 26,000 square kilometers. One of the particular features of rural life in Rwanda is its extreme scattered nature. However, In traditional landscape where peasants have no work, we have geometrical structures of what we call paysanat, or peasant collectives. This map shows the distribution of paysanat in Rwanda. The area covers 1/10 of the country. Each paysanat is planned in order to ensure farmers monetary income on the basis of agriculture, coffee, for example. This system of paysanat, or collectives, has existed since 1963. Each peasant receives 2 hectares in which he builds his house and cultivates his crops. This style of life permits the population of these collectives to enjoy certain social and economic advantages. Clean and healthy water is available to each peasant. Indeed, thanks to the efforts at organization made by the peasants, they have formed cooperatives for the marketing of their produce. In collectives where structures have already been established, it becomes easier to organize social and sanitary centers. Education is a major concern of parents, and each peasant participates through human investment in the building of schools to train the future generation. The challenge of housing is met by a fundamental change in the structures of habitations. Rwanda continues to extend this system of collectives, making them more productive and more profitable. Hence, they're opening the way to the future for the forthcoming generations.
Je remercie le directeur général.
I thank the Director General of Urban Development and Public Works and Community Services of Rwanda. The next speaker is the Ambassador of Brazil to Canada, His Excellency, Mr. Geraldo de Carvalho Silos. He has the floor.
Mr. President, on behalf of the Brazilian delegation, allow me to congratulate Mr. Barton Dawson upon his election to the presidency of the United Nations Conference on Human Settlements. I would also like to extend our sincere compliments to our gracious hosts, the government and the people of Canada, for the magnificent way in which arrangements for the habitat have been set up in the very beautiful and the most hospitable city of Vancouver. Mr. President, fellow delegates, the Habitat Conference is one in a series of major conferences held by the United Nations with the objective of establishing an orderly structure for great themes of universal importance. Brazil has been present at these meetings and has subscribed to the plans of action and declarations of a global nature there adopted, in a realistic and constructive spirit of cooperating in concerted action in specific fields of activity at the international level, and always bearing in mind that it is indispensable to reconcile the interests of the members of the United Nations as an expression of the international community with the imperative needs of national sovereignty. The Habitat Conference is to examine exclusively and on a global basis matters related to the settlement of men upon the earth. The study of such questions must be a priority with no links to any other factors which, in this particular case, would be of only parallel importance. The idea of habitats necessarily implies the conservation of the human factor and therefore of the conditions of life, both in the country and the city. In the equation of the problems of its development, Brazil places man as the foremost objective of all its national planning. The government has adopted countless measures to enhance the Brazilian, enable him to benefit from the results of national progress, whatever the region has chosen to inhabit. Brazil has shown it is capable of undergoing an eminently dynamic development experience, associating political will through national mobilization with the ability to produce through action by the public sector, by private enterprise, and by the community. Thus, the country is able to activate, to a high degree, its growth potential and its economic dimension. As the economic accomplishments are consolidated, the social problem became a first level concern for the Brazilian government. Brazil has already shown that it can build a society endowed with structures in which the human dimension continues to be the constant of our historical formation, together with the imagination and creativity displayed in all sectors of national life. These praiseworthy characteristics of Brazilian culture must be amalgamated within a modern social organization in order to help in building the nation by applying realism, but not scepticism, always progressive, with a firm grasp on the objectives and the continuity of orientation. Mr. President, through the years, the economic evolution of our country has brought about an upsurge of growth centers, which are extremely dynamic next to some unoccupied areas. Profound changes are taking place quantitatively and qualitatively as a consequence of economic results and the social and institutional changes. However, contrasts still remain. It is the firm intention of the Brazilian government to reduce the number of unoccupied areas and to integrate all the national space into the process of development. A symbol of this integration process launched in the country is Brasilia. The new city, which was planned as the capital of the nation, is at the same time the agent for national integration and new center of growth, which is awakening the hinterland and having a dynamic effect on it. City of the future, Brasilia expresses the Brazilian people who have started to move into and occupy the country's territory in an effort to achieve their own development. Mr. President, it is up to each country to make its own global definition of the urban structure to be established nationally in function of its objectives and the programs of development. We recognize the need and importance of an urban planning policy. It must, however, be adjusted to the process of development in order to allow the urban structure to be adapted from the very beginning to their social and economic reality. The city will then be situated within the growth center to which it belongs, and both its economic and social role and the physical urban aspect will be determined. This approach will bring about the geographical reorientation of the main lines along which the city expands, a solution which, in the long run, appears to be more rational and less costly than engineering measures that consider the present trends of evolution only as a mechanical datum. Parallel to the policy of urbanization, the Brazilian government has developed programs for the improvement of living conditions in rural zones, programs which include extending to the countryside such social legislation benefits as minimum wages and retirement pensions. The Brazilian government has been encouraging the development of the less advanced regions of the country, especially those of the north and the northeast, through the action of the regional development agencies and by means of a series of fiscal and financial incentives. In this series of elements related to the problem of the human settlements, the protection of the environment stands out. We consider that protection of the environment an essential factor of development. However, environmental concerns should not be given priority over the problems of social, economic, and technical nature that serve and effect as a framework for urban planning. They should, however, be taken into account and integrated into solutions fit to local conditions. In this sense, we contend that measures for environmental protection shall not imply limitation on national sovereignty or on the country's process of development. While dealing with the preservation of the environment, it must be recognized that supplying the lack of basic requirements for sanitation and biological control essential for health still constitutes a top priority for developing countries. The setting up of an efficacious policy in this field under federal guidance includes basic legislation, institutionalization of government action in the light of studies in specific fields, and adequate mechanism for control and supervision to ensure the implementation of the policy as outlined. This policy is being implemented in three main areas: in the cities, in the conservation of natural resources, and the defense and protection of human health. Within this framework, particular significance is attributed to the policies of the use of the land, urban and rural, within a rational zoning system and a system of reforestation serving the objectives of development and the protection of the environment. With respect to action on the international level, Brazil considers it important to have international cooperation in order to overcome the complex problems of the human settlements. We consider, however, that the programs of international cooperation should only be carried out at the request of the countries interested in them. No approach, regional or sub-regional, should override the singular features of each country and its options in the field of international cooperation. Brazil, therefore, gives its priority to national efforts, which are the central objective for programs of international cooperation. The problems that brought us to Vancouver are serious ones. Their solution will require intense national efforts and the proficient international cooperation. We must determine, and with clarity and precision, distinguish between that which pertains to the international order of each nation and that which is legitimately incumbent upon the community of states. It shall be our duty to delimit these areas. Much of our work is done on the basis of studies that, with a greater or lesser clairvoyance, attempt to shape the years and decades to come. This exercise, so stimulating and useful, must always be regarded with the utmost prudence. The future has almost always been different from the forecasts, either pessimistic or optimistic, of those who lived in the past. What has been constant is the human ability to face the challenges which the evolution of society has itself created. Brazil has confidence in its ability to overcome the obstacles that stand in the way of the full realization of our national community, and reaffirms its abiding faith that the international community here assembled will join together in efforts to construct a better, more human, and more fraternal tomorrow for mankind. I thank you, sir.
Je remercie
I thank His Excellency, the Ambassador of Brazil to Canada. I now call on the delegate of Paraguay. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, our participation at this United Nations Conference on Human Settlements is consistent with the always manifest will of the government of Paraguay to participate in every legitimate effort the international community makes to solve the major problems which so profoundly affect mankind. We come to this beautiful city of Vancouver whose gracious hospitality we appreciate, breathing out the optimism we breathed in at home. But here, after the first days of this conference, which may become genuinely historic, the world picture looms before us, dyed black by somber clouds, which cast tragic shadows on the immediate future. You know, no doubt, that ours is a nation which barely a century ago was almost exterminated, that we are landlocked, we have no coasts on the sea, that we have lived a long period of anarchy and disorder, of coup d'etat and barrack uprisings, which took place almost without interruption until the very recent decade of the 50s. And yet, beginning at that time, under the wise and sober guidance of the nationalist and Republican government of President Stroessner, an eminently peaceful revolution dealt seriously with the transformation of the old structures which for so long had stultified the creative genius of our people. Allows, Mr. President, to be those who bring a note of optimism to this conference, from which our governments and our peoples expect so much. We Paraguayans have a profound faith in man and in his capacity to engender solutions. We have faith in the achievements of science and in the validity of technology whenever it is used to improve the living conditions of people. We believe in the universality and solidarity of people. Like President Stroessner, we believe that difficulties are there to be overcome. The first task which our revolution was compelled to undertake was to win peace. Peace conceived of in its most dynamic concept, as a state of mind, as a personal conviction of each member of the nation, as a point of departure, but also as a consequence at the same time of a development process, the mechanisms of which must fully guarantee effective participation by the people in the material and cultural benefits derived from it. The subject of human settlements is particularly attractive to our country because it was precisely because of the defective human settlements which brought about so much backwardness, poverty, disorder, and uncertainty in a not too distant future, which we are now correcting at an accelerated rate. Until the year 1950, 80% of the population of Paraguay was concentrated within a radius not larger than 100 kilometers, starting at Asunción, the capital. We bear in mind that the area of our national territory is 406,752 square kilometers, and that in 1950 our population was only 1,328,000. We realize why it has so rightly been said that Paraguay is a country of lands without men and of men without lands. If we note that then no more than 7% of the farm workers were farm owners, while the remaining 93% was made up of precarious occupiers and people who rented and paid the latifundia of between 50 and 60% of its production. We then realize why our development process has found that agrarian reform was the most suitable instrument to give impetus to agriculture and make it open to participation. Agrarian reform is for us a national programs whose basic guidelines are enshrined in the Constitution. The Agrarian Statute guarantees private property ownership in rural areas, but a social and economic function is assigned. It is the same law which authorizes the executive power to allocate by decree the lands which are necessary both for new settlements as well as to correct and improve the existing ones. Within this context, the Institute of Rural Welfare has settled 150,000 families of farmers, of which 100,000 already have ownership titles. So the rural Paraguayan worker, except in specific exceptions, pays in cash or in produce the price which the Institute sets for the lot of land of at least 20 hectares, which is allocated. With this money, we finance an important percentage of assistance services. Our experience is proving that programs of agrarian reform can be self-financing. What is more, in the specific case of Paraguay, we have gone beyond our most painful period without having received a single cent from abroad. Yet we must point out that on leaving the terrible backwardness which afflicted us, we were able to have access to international organizations for financing and technical assistance. In this connection, it is our duty to recall the assistance offered us and provided us by the Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank, and United Nations agencies. We also wish to mention the permanent assistance given us by the Inter-American Institute of Agricultural Sciences, with the cooperation of which we're endeavoring to improve our experience in settling soldiers of the armed forces and associate them in community enterprises. We're trying to give proof of our appreciation for the assistance given, but it is our complete conviction that international cooperation can and should be provided in even broader terms and in more advantageous conditions. The precedent, which has already been set by the World Bank, whose credits for a specific development project, rural development project, was given us on a 50 years term, 10 years grace, 0.75 of yearly commission with no interest, warrants our thinking of a more encouraging future in this vital field in the struggle for development, so that we view the future from a different historical perspective. If in 20 years we were able to settle on their own lands more than 60% of the rural population, if we have diversified and substantially increased our production and are improving our productivity, if we succeeded in correcting the problem of population concentration by a policy of internal migration which led to an increase in the population in the departments affected by agrarian reform by 240%, making possible a more rational settlement of the land and a progressive use of unexploited resources. If in 20 years we managed to build 80% of the entire road network, if in 20 years we established the first water systems and sewages for our cities, we built hospitals, schools, and colleges, expanded universities, and gave them institutes and faculties which are directly connected to our development requirements, both in our capital as well as outside it. And we restructured public administration and made it efficient and functional by a central planning agency and 2 organizations for decision coordination and evaluation: the National Council of Economic Coordination and the National Council of Social Progress. Even 20 years, we succeeded in having 98% of the families own their the place where they live, and we're providing electric energy to most of our national territory, we now feel it is our legitimate right to claim a more vigorous international cooperation. Mr. President, our people is accustomed to sacrifice. Historically, we are trained to meet demands which are in apparent disproportion to our limited possibilities. Together with the sister Federal Republic of Brazil, we are beginning to build the largest hydroelectric power station of the world, and we are also determined to build 2 other major power stations with our Argentine brothers. Itaipu, Yacyretá, and Corpus will provide Paraguay with an installed potential exceeding 10 million kilowatts hour and will constitute tangible examples of what our peoples can achieve when they work in unison, when the solidarity guiding their struggle against underdevelopment is effective. In respect to these works, they will give eloquent proof of the benefits we can obtain with a frank and firm bilateral or multilateral cooperation. And delegates will have more data when we show the film and in the report we have prepared for this Habitant Conference. Finally, we should inform you that the government of Paraguay shares the philosophy which inspires the documents which the Secretary General was so good as to transmit to us. The Declaration of Principles and recommendations for the adoption of national action were carefully analyzed at the highest government level by the National Council of Social Progress and were publicly debated when we held the first national symposium on human settlements. However, we deem it useless and unnecessary to make them instruments of political propaganda, since each of our peoples, each of our governments has the irrenounceable right to model their own destinies. We wish to be very clear and categorical on this point, which is vital for us, without deprecating the values which are universally valid, even recognizing and advocating the inevitable need for solidarity and cooperation. We ratify our certainty that, as has been so often emphasized so often by President Stroessner, and I quote, only the people and government of Paraguay will decide on the solutions which are required for the problems of Paraguay. Thank you. Capsule, please.
La República del Paraguay.
The Republic of Paraguay is a landlocked country with much forestry, rivers, and an extraordinary fertility. Until 1950, human settlements in Paraguay were concentrated in the capital, Asunción, and its environs. More than 80% of the total population of the country lived in an area the radius of which did not go beyond 100 kilometers. Building Highway 7, 150 kilometers long, which opens the virgin jungle, made it possible in 1957 to build on the River Paraná the port President Stroessner, 327 kilometers west of Asunción. This has been selected for settling small populations and make them owners of new economic units in an area where the fertility of the soil and support services guarantee their social and economic advancement. The Itaipu Dam, a binational undertaking of Brazil and Paraguay, will be on the Paraná River, approximately 14 miles above the international bridge which links Port Stroessner in Paraguay with Port Iguaçu in Brazil. This is a task of enormous magnitude and will be the largest hydroelectric power center in the world and will require accommodation for workers and all the needed services. We have scheduled the building of 8,000 family buildings, 4,000 on Paraguayan soil and 4,000 units on Brazilian soil. The approximate cost is approximately $289,700,000. Various public sectors are executing projects, the main objective of which is to promote the harmonious integrated development of Port Stroessner and its environments so as to promote public and private investments, public services and amenities, and thus bring well-being to the population.
I thank the member of the Council of Institute of Rural Welfare of Paraguay. The next speaker is the Minister for Protection of Natural Environment of the Eyebrow Coast, His Excellency Francis Dakore Table. May he take the floor, please.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, I hope you will be my spokesman to the government, the people of Canada, to express the greetings